Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. The sun is shining. The updates in terms of the new manager at Norwich City, we're going to bring you in the next hour or so. Conor Southwell will be joining us very shortly. He's just finishing a few pieces of work that he's just got to do, and then he'll be joining us. Of course, we've got me and Sam for the next 5 or 10 minutes. We want your comments, questions, predictions, or whatever it might be in terms of the new manager at Carrow Road. Sam, it was this time last week. We were in Leeds. We had some breakfast and the news broke that David Wagner had been dismissed of his position as Norwich City's head coach. I suppose the reaction at the time, maybe some fan surprise, maybe some less so, given kind of the quick turnaround of the result the night before. How have you found the last week? There's been kind of different candidates in the frame. Profile maybe fits kind of what Ben Knapper had outlined in that sort of, when they released the news that David Wagner was leaving, there was kind of the quotes from Ben Knapper about switching in a different direction. It felt like we probably got the indication that it was going to be a younger coach, maybe more progressive. The coaches that have come out sort of in the frame, I suppose, or maybe suit that kind of narrative and suit that style. Are you surprised at any of the names that have been out there?
I'm not especially surprised. I think there was sort of a level of hesitation when Pascal Jansen's name came out, and he is a 51-year-old who fairly recently lost his job with a sort of bigger club. And I felt in terms of the sort of coach that Norwich fans probably wanted and one that is on the way up, that didn't suit things in exactly that way. But you look at the rest of his sort of credentials and he plays pretty attractive football. He's worked with younger players and he's also worked in Europe where the sort of sporting director model is a little bit more prominent, and he was more of a sort of head coach than the more traditional manager David Wagner ended up being. So I think if you take them all as an overall package, there was certainly a pattern that sort of developed. And when that happens to start off with, that can feel like it's just certain sections of the media, pulling names together and going for cliches. But the way that it has unfolded, and from what we're told, it does feel like these names that a lot of people are aware of are the ones that are genuinely in the frame for this job. So yeah, I think it's generally panned out in pretty much exactly the way that I thought it would, given how Ben Knapper has worked previously at Norwich and elsewhere. He's somebody who clearly likes to sort of take his time and assess all the available options before making a decision. That's what we saw him do with David Wagner, and obviously deciding to go in a different direction from him. And I think that's what we're seeing him do with the hope that an appointment can be made next week. I think it's in a position where Norwich have taken things at their own pace. And although this week has felt very big in terms of the amount of promise that there is and the maybe undecided factors and the amount of things we're talking about in terms of tangible actual announcements and things like that, the only thing we've really had was that on Monday, obviously, there were the players that were released, and a lot of those were ones that we pretty much expected to happen anyway. So, yeah, quite a strange week, quite an interesting one, but I'm expecting things to probably ramp up in terms of the actual tangible movement stakes next week, probably.
Yeah, what have you made of that timeline? Obviously, this time last week, David Wagner's dismissed of his position. This week's been kind of the interview process, I suppose. Are you surprised at maybe the number of interviewees that Ben Knapper seems to be going for, or is that maybe standard practice, I suppose, across English football in terms of different profiles of managers, maybe trying to get them in front of you and sort of maybe guessing which one maybe will take you in the direction that you want to go in?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is due diligence, and even if Knapper did have a name in his head that he wanted going into it, obviously we can only speculate about who that might be. But a lot of people that I've seen sort of speaking about it, and people that asked in our Q&A and things, were actually sort of alarmed by the number of names that were in the frame, because it was like, oh well, Knapper's had this plan for so long and he knew he was going to sack Wagner for so long. Why doesn't he have one person? But this is a situation where Norwich will want to do their due diligence. I actually remember Stuart Webber, back when he appointed Dean Smith, talking about the fact that he had been a really big fan of Dean Smith, and Smith was the best appointment for them and the person that they wanted. But regardless, they spoke to other people and they made those, they sort of went through those processes because they wanted to know for sure that they were getting the right man. So I think that's what Norwich are going through at the moment. Maybe they don't necessarily have one person that they're specifically targeting, but even if they do, I think it makes sense to just have conversations with other people to see if there's any any theme that pops out and anything that you can learn from those, and anyone that surprises you maybe with how well they interview and anything like that. So yeah, given what I spoke about before and Knapper's enjoyment, I suppose, or I don't know if that's the right word, but he likes to have those sort of maybe slightly longer timelines where he has more opportunity to assess his options. I think it makes sense to anyone who's seen that before that Norwich are going about things in the way that they are. And for me, that's actually a good sign rather than any sign of weakness or not having a plan going into it.
Do you feel the candidates that are sort of maybe coming to the forefront are all similar in terms of their profile, their style? I think maybe a lot's been spoken around kind of the direction they're going in, but they all seem quite aligned. I know there's some differences, and that's kind of been spoken a little bit around, social media. You mentioned kind of Jansen being a different age profile, maybe more of the manager-esque kind of, he's a coach, but more sort of that experienced head coach rather than these younger progressive managers that have maybe come through coaching schools and they've maybe been assistants and had to work their way up and sort of learn the game in a different way. So are you excited or pleased by kind of the nature of the candidates that are out there at the moment?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited, to be honest. I've said it for months now, because even when Norwich were doing well, there was this conversation about who would take over from Wagner or who I would like as a manager or a head coach. It's probably the better word or the better words to use in this scenario. So I have answered this, a few times, and I've always said, I hope it's somebody I've never heard of before. And when it comes to Thorup, that is definitely somebody I haven't heard of. I'm not saying it's definitely going to be him. Obviously, there are others in the frame, but they seem to be sort of coaches where Knapper is trying to be a bit more clever and looking outside the box rather than just the ones that sort of end up being thrown in every single managerial rumour mill that there is in this country. So I'm not especially surprised by that. I think we all knew that Norwich were going to turn more towards this sort of data-led, slightly more intelligent approach, if I can use that word. And these coaches seem to sort of fit that profile. So the way that I think Norwich need to go, which is finding hidden gems and going a slightly different way about it, that's what they've signalled with this head coach process and with some of the names that are currently in the frame and have been interviewed. So although they're not exclusively in that outside of the box pack, I think in terms of how Norwich are going to have to navigate things now going forward, it's definitely a good sign that they're looking at coaches of this sort of type going into what will be quite a significant change and quite a different direction for their future.
Yeah, so we'll drill down into all these individuals very shortly, or wait for Conor to join us. But of course, lots been made of sort of the betting market, I suppose, and the forefront runners in that. I'm just going to bring up the current sort of record that's out there at the moment. So you're looking at kind of the market there. There's quite a lot of outsiders there, the likes of Ashley Cole, which is never going to happen, I don't think, in a million chances. Carlos Cuesta, I think there's been an update Conor just put out on his Twitter account, which I'm sure when he comes in we'll give you that. Same with Liam Rosenior, but maybe those front three, there's been kind of various reports this week. Jansen, I think it was Monday night, there was some reports around him, of course, formerly of Alkmaar. Will Still, there's been lots of talk about him being at the Lotus Training Centre this week and being one of those in the frame. And then Johannes Hoff Thorup, there's been lots of conversation around him and the work permit and everything around that, which of course we'll drill into shortly. But Sam, we've spoken a lot about the betting market. I think people have mentioned it on social media. You can't really read much into it, or can you?
No, I think it's kind of ridiculous in a way. Yes, I suppose at the moment those top three candidates in the betting odds are the ones that seem to be the sort of top three in the frame for Norwich at the moment. But first of all, we know they're speaking to somebody today, and I'm not sure that name is actually in the upper echelons of those odds. Also, just the way that it's done, I think is kind of ridiculous, because as everyone knows, the betting odds are just done on who's placing bets on who. And as you said, we now know Liam Rosenior is out of the running. It's felt, to be honest, for a while like Carlos Cuesta wasn't going to happen. Even when Wagner was sacked, there were reports that the sort of interest in Cuesta had cooled, and that's what we've been hearing more and more since then. So there are still names that people are sort of lumping on that actually are completely out of the running. So you maybe can't read loads from those, but I'll admit that it is sort of a guilty pleasure of mine, or it has been at times when Norwich have not had a coach, to have a look at those betting odds and see which names are in the frame, because I think we all had to be honest, a fairly decent laugh outside Ellen Road when Conor was looking at those betting odds and reading out to us that the likes of Sam Allardyce, Chris Hughton, Steve Bruce were all in the running. So I think as a sort of piece of entertainment and a thought exercise, it can be enjoyable to have a look at those odds. But in terms of, aside from the really obvious ones where it's actually in public and everyone knows that they're potentially in the frame for the job, I don't think you learn much from those, to be honest.
Yeah, I can now bring in Mr. Conor Southwell himself. Conor, how are you this afternoon? Quickly before we get into everything.
I'm good. It's been a busy old week, hasn't it? But I'm good, gents. How are you both?
Yeah, we're good. Of course, we've got into maybe kind of the more generic sort of manager spiel. We're going to get into the individuals now you've joined us, but just going to quickly put up the tweet you've just put out, and then I'm just going to ask you to expand a little bit on it. So NCFC are working on a few potential scenarios. So it's obvious that that would involve whether or not Thorup would qualify for a work permit. Understand another candidate being spoken to today, Cuesta and Rosenior, are not in the running. Hope for an announcement next week. So kind of just want to expand a little bit on that and, kind of the permutations around that.
Yeah, of course. So for those that haven't seen, I think there's been some reports this lunchtime that Norwich City have hypothetically got a work permit for Johannes Thorup. This is an issue that I think we documented right at the start of the week when we sort of made the interest public along with a couple of others, that because he has coached for basically coaches who are in a band 1 to 5 league, which the Superliga is in from the Danish perspective, they would need to basically be in charge. I think it's for 23 months. He's only been in charge for 16. So that means Norwich would likely have to go to an exceptions panel. This is all obviously because of Brexit. They would then have to go and make an appeal basically and make the case along with some really, really good references and lots of evidence that will back up to basically argue why he is an outstanding candidate, why he is a talent that is worthy of being given a work permit, even though he doesn't naturally qualify for it. So I think it's inevitable, therefore, that there would have been people from the club. And in fact, I know that some people have travelled down to London and tried to talk in terms of this process. They would have tried to make sure that all of those elements would be lined up. So they got themselves in a position where if Thorup is the man, and it's worth reiterating that as of 1:20 on Friday afternoon that we're speaking, nobody has been offered the Norwich job formally. But if they were in a position where they did want to offer it to him, you don't want to be doing that after you've made that decision, because then you've got 2 weeks potentially of having to go through this will he, won't he kind of situation. You pee off, frankly, all the other candidates involved in the process as well, because if that doesn't come through and then you've got to go to one of those guys, then makes you look a bit silly, and then maybe they don't want the job because they haven't been first choice or whatever. So, and it's the same for every candidate. There's some stuff around Will Still that they've had to sort out as well. So this isn't unique, and it doesn't mean anything other than this is just Norwich City lining up all the various elements for an appointment, as you say, next week. And then, yeah, on the other elements, they're speaking to another candidate today, which is, obviously part of the process because they spoke to Will Still earlier, really at the start of the week, Monday, Tuesday, and they're speaking to someone else today. That would not surprise me. I don't know this for sure, but it would not surprise me if that was Pascal Jansen, who is the other name that's been publicly available. Wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't him and it was someone completely different. But Carlos Cuesta, who is the Arsenal coach, who I think has been linked for a long period of time, and Liam Rosenior are definitely two names that we can put a pencil through, because they're not going to be Norwich City's next head coach. And all of this is gearing up for an appointment next week. I don't have any more detail than that, I'm afraid. So yeah, I would say, whilst the Thorup situation maybe presents him to be the first choice or in pole position or any of this kind of terminology, we simply don't know that yet. This is just Norwich City lining up all the various elements that they need so that when they are ready to offer someone formally the job, they can make that process as quick and as streamlined as possible. And that would obviously involve whether or not he would qualify for a work permit. So that's the situation. He has a game with Nordsjælland on Sunday. So even in the event of anything kicking off, I wouldn't necessarily expect that before then anyway. So that's kind of the state of play as I understand it, Adam.
Yeah, lots of comments and questions flooding through. We will work our way through those as we go through the show. We'll now start to break down individual managers and maybe have a more of a conversation around the style, the profile, and maybe the fit, whether it would work with Norwich City. First and foremost, we'll get into that man who's been spoken around a little bit this lunchtime, Johannes Hoff Thorup. Here he is, a Danish manager, 35 years of age. As Conor outlined, the manager of Nordsjælland in Denmark. Their season does end on Sunday. I think they're currently fourth in that division. There was some talk around the work permit situation. I mean, there's obviously been the reports that Conor's just outlined there in terms of that situation. Purely on the profile, what do you make of that one, Sam? He's I think, well renowned for youth development, which obviously is something that, Norwich have, and Ben Knapper is very keen to utilise, I suppose, moving into next season. Is he maybe potentially the right fit for Norwich City?
Yeah, he ticks plenty of boxes, really, in terms of, working in Europe and having that slightly more modern view of things, I think. And as you mentioned, the focus on young players, anyone who just looks through Norgeland's squad at the moment, there's numerous players who are under 21, and that's a club that has been built on that sort of philosophy for a really long time now. So he definitely ticks those sorts of boxes. In terms of style of football, it's quite progressive as well. It can be quite quick, the way that they pass forward, but it tends to be on the floor rather than especially direct. They use the wide areas quite a lot, which I actually found very interesting when you consider the fact that Jansen, who I know we'll come on to, and I don't want to give too many spoilers on him, but Jansen is also somebody who has tended to use the wide areas a lot in how his teams tend to attack. So that's a sort of common denominator between two managers or two coaches that we know are in the running. And yeah, I think in a lot of ways, Thorup tends to fit a lot of the things that Norwich fans are expecting from their next coach. At 35, he's definitely young on the spectrum, but he's not completely inexperienced. However, the jump from that level of football to the Championship is pretty huge. And having watched a lot of those games to try and gauge what sort of style his Norgeland side actually plays, you can tell that the quality of players he was working with there is not really especially close at all to what you'd expect in the Championship. So in terms of the level of football, it would be a jump. But I suppose what a lot of people would say is that coaching wise, that doesn't matter a huge amount. It's more about dealing with the personalities and with players who have been there and done it before and maybe are expecting a little bit more personally and dealing with those sort of dressing room situations. But given how Norwich are going to address their squad this summer and what they're trying to do to that squad, you'd say that isn't going to be as much of a problem had he gone into a dressing room last season with the number of experienced players that maybe David Wagner liked to have under him. So yeah, I think in pretty much every single way it suits what Ben Knapper would want. It's just about whether he can make that quite huge step from the league in Denmark to the Championship and whether Knapper feels he's capable of doing that. But yeah, I think if all of us imagined a coach that Ben Knapper would like, I think pretty much all of us would name someone very, very similar to Thorup. So I'm not surprised to see his name in the running, and I think in a lot of ways he would be what Norwich need.
Yeah, I think you just touched a little bit on there, Jack. Norwich saying, do we know what style of football this Thorup chap actually plays? I mean, from the research I've done, Conor, he's quite wedded to a 4-3-3. I've done a little bit of kind of watching of YouTube videos. It seems like he can speak English, which of course is a huge benefit for us and the players particularly as well when he's trying to get that messaging across. Have you sort of done any more sort of delving, I suppose, into kind of that playing style? Is it possession based? What can we expect from him if he, is the man who's unveiled as Norwich City's new head coach?
Yeah, possession based. Interestingly as well, he is a transfer room, which is a tool that is used by football clubs to sort of assess head coaches and players as well, actually. But he tops the rankings in terms of youth development and those kind of things. So it's obvious why, if that was the way that you wanted to go in the direction that you wanted to go, you would look at him. So yeah, and I think actually, really, there is a thread between all of the candidates who have become public knowledge. You think him, Will Still, Pascal Jansen, I know is of a slightly different age profile, but in terms of consistency of thought, I think it runs through all three with different tweaks in amongst all of them. So really interesting head coach, very highly rated. He's somebody who has been mentioned with the Hamburg job earlier in the season, I think around January time, and that never really came to fruition. I think he decided to stay in Denmark in the end. So yeah, someone who's very highly rated. He's young, he's process driven, and that seems to like the sort of coach that Norwich City want to hire. So in the running, one of several. I think, again, I would reiterate, just because of maybe some of the reports around work permits and all this elements, doesn't necessarily mean he's first choice, doesn't necessarily mean he's in pole position. It just means he is one that is under consideration, which is the case for all of them. But yeah, he is someone, as Sam said, who plays attractive football, who's very clear in terms of his ideology. He's quite modern in terms of likes the fullbacks to invert, plays with probably a bit more of a flat three than David Wagner did in midfield. I've seen a lot of people suggest that maybe his style of football is similar to David Wagner's. I don't think that is the case. Is there similarities? Of course. And are there similar ideas? Yes. But I don't think the general thrust of what he wants to do is similar at all, really. So, yeah, I think there'd have to be a lot of patience if he came in with the style of play and what he'd want to implement, and obviously a clear recruitment strategy to recruit to that style of play as well. But yeah, clearly a very highly rated coach, not just on Danish shores, but on European shores, because I think what he's doing at Nordsjælland in a pretty short period of time as well, he's not been a head coach long, only 16 months, is one that will naturally really impress people because of his record and the fact that he's got a team there with not limited resources, but compared to some of the heavyweights in that country, and he's got them competing. So that's key, really. And if you're Norwich, I think a head coach, and actually this is probably the same with Will Still, you're probably interested in a coach that has maybe shown they can outperform with the resources that they've got. So I think that's an interesting thread as well that maybe hasn't really been touched upon so far, that they're looking at coaches in that sort of reason. And Alkmaar as well, if you look at maybe some of their rivals in that league and the way that Jansen has done it. Sorry, I've broadened that out a little bit, but yeah, I think he is someone that would bring a very progressive style of play, and I think he is in the mold of kind of these young coaches in England that we see, Liam Manning, Russell Martin, these types. He feels quite like that, not really played, come from a very coaching specific background. Obviously that's not the case for Russell Martin. But that's kind of how I see him as a candidate, and very young as well. If he did become Norwich City's head coach, he'd be the second youngest in the Championship, behind Tom Cleverley, which would be incredible, and Danny Roll, I think. Sorry, third. But even that is remarkable, I think.
Yeah, you touched on him there. Will Still, there's been a lot of conversation around him, I suppose, on social media more generally this season around kind of the joke that was running, in terms of them having to pay for Rems having to pay a fee for every single match that he managed due to no pro license, but that's now been sorted, so that's not an issue that Norwich City would have to face. But Sam, what do you make of that one? He's one that we've sort of had confirmed has been at the Lotus Training Centre this week. Is one that's been interviewed. I mean, he's openly kind of said that he wants to move back to England and maybe move in the Championship. I think he's been linked to Sunderland in recent times as well. I was watching a little bit of the High Performance podcast yesterday he done with Jake Humphrey. He spoke a lot about kind of his background and growing up in Belgium and maybe having to be a little bit different in terms of he wanted to go into football, wasn't really sure the route maybe into that. He came back to England, done a coaching course at a uni, I think, in Preston, and got his degree there. Has then worked his way through the Belgian leagues, had to kind of maybe go through spells where he wasn't even being paid just to be able to get a route into management. Then goes to Rems as the assistant coach, gets sort of thrusted into the senior position. What do you make of him as a profile, as a manager? I think a lot's been spoken around maybe his win ratio, but that probably feels a little bit harsh given he's sort of managing a side that's in maybe the mid-table of the Liga Run.
Yeah, it's been quite hard to sort of part from all the wider media perception of him and get away from the sort of football manager conversation and all of those cliches that, as you said, were coming out on Twitter a few months ago. It feels like a little bit of that has calmed down, but maybe has ramped up again a little bit since he's been linked with these jobs back in England and in the Championship specifically. But as you say, I think there has been a bit of an underestimation of what he's achieved so far. He's managed Beerschot, who aren't a small club in Belgium. They're not huge, but he has been in the top division as their head coach. He then went to Ligue 1, which we have to remember is a top 5 league, and he's not been at a club battling relegation or anything like that. They've been mid-table, as you said. And yes, that win ratio isn't amazing, and I think he won 2 in his last 14. But that, for me, the temptation to look at that is such a short-term one. When you look at the whole context of a manager's career and what they've achieved throughout it, 14 games is absolutely nothing, especially with a side that's absolutely bang mid-table in the top division in France and didn't really have anything to worry about second half of the season. So I think the credentials are absolutely, definitely there. But maybe he isn't as ideological. I don't think the style of play, although the style of play has been pretty good at times, I don't think it's as defined and as ideological and as consistent maybe as a couple of the other coaches. But he does have that age profile, which we know Norwich want. He's obviously the youngest of these three that we're discussing at 31. And I think he gives you a really, really good blend because he still is on the way up. Yes, I know he's been in the top division and I talked about those credentials, but, from mid-table in Ligue 1 to hopefully the top end of the Championship with Norwich would still feel like a step up, or at least not a step down. So he sort of got that. But to have that and to be such a young age with still the experience of having managed in 2 pretty decent top flights in Europe, I think that is a man with pretty good credentials. And although I can understand why people are questioning it, for me, you don't have to scratch the surface much to see where Still is impressive. Obviously, we also know he has this relationship with Knapper, which would possibly help if he arrived at Norwich, because they both know how each other work. And yes, the relationship was different because Knapper was working at Arsenal as a loans manager, trying to sort of manage one player and discuss one player with Still. So it would be slightly different to then a sporting director and a head coach model, but they sort of understand each other's dialogue and they understand how they see football between them. So there are definitely plenty of advantages with Will Still as well. And though I can understand the issues maybe about the fact that he isn't quite coming off the same level of momentum that Thorup would be if he came to Carrow Road, I think most people can actually see the benefits to Still, and I can personally as well.
Yeah, a lot's been made kind of around his football manager interest, and I know you're a man that likes football manager, Conor, so I'm going to come to you on this element. Very data-driven. I think he's wedded to a 4-2-3-1, which is something that Norwich, of course, have played a lot under Daniel Farke. What do you maybe make of his playing style and what he adopted at Rem? Is that something that could translate to the Championship and have success? I've seen people in the comments maybe speak a little bit about Farke and company. When they get to the Premier League, it maybe doesn't work in terms of that style. Does he have that kind of pragmatic nature that he could go and adapt if Norwich, reached those sort of levels again?
Yeah, I think so. And I think he's proven that with Rem more than anything. You look at, and I know you spoke about systems there. He's played a 3 at the back at times. He's gone for a bit more of a 4-3-3 at times. So there has been adaptation for different opponents. There's a really good video on YouTube, actually, him breaking down the tactics of how he basically nullified PSG and got a 0-0 draw with them in what I think was his first game in charge of the club. So there is clearly a flexibility there. But I think what I would say to people, and I can see it in the comments now, talking about the unbeaten run that he went on in his favour and the negative one that ended his spell at Rem negatively. And I've seen plenty of people talk about win ratios as well. And I just don't think you can judge a manager based on a win percentage and a win ratio. It's just not an accurate way to do one. For example, and this is stripping the context that all of us know, David Wagner's got a higher win percentage as Norwich City head coach than Nigel Worthington did. That is removing a whole lot of context if we're boiling down the analysis to those simplistics. And equally, you take someone like Vincent Kompany, who's just been relegated with Burnley. I don't think Bayern Munich are looking at his win percentage if they're trying to make him their head coach. It's not about that for head coaches, really. It's about what do they offer? What playing style do they offer? What is their policy with young players? What, as we've discussed, what is their tactical setup? What do they bring as a personality? How do they lead the group? How do they command the group? I think all of that is relevant when it comes to Will Still. And you're right, and Sam's right as well. This kind of football manager shtick has kind of been pinned against him, probably partially unfairly, because he is a career coach. He's someone who's been coaching since he was 14 alongside his brother. It just happens that football manager was his route into it. I played football manager. That doesn't mean that I've unfortunately gone and managed some French teams at that age, but it is an area that, again, anyone with interest in football has done, the same way they play FIFA or whatever that's called these days. Or I sound like right old in there, don't I? But whatever that's called, what is it, EA something? If you play any game or engage with any type of football, it's just an interest in football. So I think that's been overplayed slightly. I think what I see when I've watched interviews with him is a real personality, actually, and someone with real drive and really good communicator, which is why I think there's been so much interest in him and what he's doing and how he's speaking. So look, and interestingly, if you want another link between Thorup and Still, I'm told they're both, well, Still obviously is very publicly a West Ham fan, but I believe Thorup is a West Ham fan as well. So maybe there's some sort of West Ham thing that is aligning the candidates that Norwich are in for. But yeah, I think with Will Still, I think maybe look beyond the gimmicks. I think they're a very talented young head coach who is more than maybe the internet persona that he's been led to believe, because you look at his Rem team, what he's done, he's overachieved drastically and dramatically play. And that's why he's so highly rated. It's not because of his win percentage. It's not because he used to play Football Manager as a kid. It's not because of the narrative. All of that is extra and is additional, and maybe tells us a little bit more about the personality and the type of coach that he is. But in terms of his body of work at Reims, ask anyone in France, they will tell you it is incredibly impressive to have made them as competitive as he has done, irrespective of win percentage, irrespective of runs of form that ended it. And actually, it's interesting. There's some quotes from the Reims chairman who maybe spoke about that media attention, maybe in the end probably affecting him negatively. And I'm sure he will have learned from that experience as well. He's got his brother as his assistant manager. They come from a video analysis background. So yeah, very interesting candidate. He will get a job in England. He will get a job in the Championship, whether that's with Norwich City or not. And he is someone that I think is highly rated within the football circles. And that is probably proof that the internet persona and the gimmicks that maybe he's become attached to him are just that. I think people need to maybe look a little bit deeper and look a little bit beyond those.
Yeah, I see a comment in here from ESB234 mentioning maybe about going for a cheap option, but Will still is a free agent. Do you think there's any kind of benefit to that, Sam? I mean, Pascal Jansen, I think, is also a free agent, where maybe Thorup has obviously got the attachment currently to Norwich. Is there any sort of thing you could read into that in terms of, them and sort of their, I suppose, their availability as a manager?
No, I have to say, I think the worry that some fans have that Norwich go for the cheap option, and this is something you see not only with players that are signing, but with pretty much every managerial appointment. I think they're maybe over-egged a little bit because, to be honest, given how important they are to the football club and what they give to the players, head coaches and managers are actually really, really cheap. Like, you look at how, the Kieran McKenna situation at Ipswich is enough evidence for anyone. It gets them from League One to the Premier League, with some players in that squad who are still very much of a League One standard, and there's talk of Ipswich wanting 4 or 5 million for that man. So although obviously Norwich are in a tight financial situation and every football club would like to save money wherever they can, I think the temptation to do that with the most important decision they make this summer, which is a huge summer, by the way, I'm not sure that's going to be enough to really filter between the candidates that much. Yes, if Norwich say that they want 25 million for Thorup, then maybe he's off the table. But the chances of that are obviously incredibly minimal. And I wouldn't think financially it's going to make much difference at all. So, I know there is a section of the fan base that tends to worry about these things, and these concerns always crop up around this time when they're appointing a manager. But I'm not sure it's had much of an impact at all in the past. I don't think it will really have too much of an impact on this one. So I would rule out any sort of selection based purely on the fact that they're the cheapest option.
Yeah, the third candidate we're going to speak about, Conor, Pascal Jansen, manager formerly of Alkmaar. Here he is, maybe slightly different to the other profile of managers we've just spoken about. He's 51 years of age. I think he's also a 4-3-3 style of coach. I know Dan Mayhew is in the comment section here somewhere. He sort of speaks a lot about Dutch football. I'd like Jansen. I was impressed with his AZ teams. However, I'm glad we are going towards the unknown and a certain progressive attacking way. Most of our recent success has come from those types. That would probably indicate maybe he's a slightly more defensive style of manager. Would you agree with that assessment?
To be honest, I haven't seen enough of him to say definitively either way. I was under the impression he was quite possession-based, but if Dan's saying that, Dan was someone who'd have a lot more knowledge than me. I think what he stands out on is his reputation in terms of youth development. And, you look at that Alkmaar team that he built, and the amount of young players that was involved in that is incredible, really, over a 4-year period. I think they didn't, or very rarely had an average age over 24, and that gives you an indication maybe of the style of coach that he is. There is a necessity at that club. It's worth adding to do that, because there are a club that are very driven around youth. But Adam, we went to Holland. They played Norwich in a pre-season friendly. That was their first one. Even in that game, they looked significantly better than Norwich did, to be completely honest. And I thought the style of play on that day was pretty good. He's been linked with the Ajax job and the Feyenoord job domestically, although he said he hasn't had any talks around those. I think Farioli's gone to Ajax, hasn't he? And there's also been some interest in him from Russia and from Poland as well, like Poznan. So he's clearly a man that's in demand. I think Olympiacos as well, to the extent where he even went to go and watch one of their youth games, but eventually wasn't selected. So yeah, clearly someone with a really good reputation. He is actually born, I think, was born in London, which is an interesting quirk. Did some good stuff in Europe with them as well. So yeah, in terms of CV, I think he's probably the one you look at as being most experienced, probably. He was also assistant to Arne Slurt when he was at the club before, obviously then stepping up when he left. So if you're bored or not of the Liverpool connection, if Jansen came, then that would definitely be reignited. So yeah, I think he's an interesting option because, like you mentioned, he's not a lot different to the candidates that they're looking at, but he is slightly different, I think, in terms of his age profile, but a background in youth development. Again, a playing style, which we've spoken about. These are consistent themes that are running through the candidates now, which is really good to see, because that at least points to the idea that Norwich have an idea of the type of coach that they want in terms of profile and what they want them to deliver. And that is, I think, significantly encouraging when, I think Sam spoke about it earlier, but when they were looking for Dean Smith and there were sort of different coaches with different styles of play in the frame. And even really, if you look at the last three coaches that they've had, from Farke to Smith to Wagner, well, under Farke, they wanted to be possession based. Under Dean Smith, I think we're still waiting to find out exactly what they were trying to do. And under David Wagner, they were a lot more about strength out of possession and energy and athleticism and pressing. We're basically talking about three different styles over three different coaches. So there does need to be an idea that goes back to what do they want to be and the identity that they want to strike. So yeah, I think it is really interesting. It's interesting that Dan says that he thinks he'll go to Feyenoord. I think he's been linked with a host of jobs. So that is maybe the only caveat. Would he feel that he could get a domestic job in the highest quality of league, or maybe elsewhere, a top flight job somewhere? Because I think he has the CV and the body of work over 4 years at Alkmaar that maybe suggests that he can. And if he decides that that's the case, then clearly Norwich will have to head in a different direction. So yeah, really interesting candidate, really different in terms of age profile, but I think we're seeing now a consistency of theme, which is really positive, I think.
So I suppose away from those three that we've spoken there quite heavily around, we sort of mentioned that Rosenior and Cuesta aren't in the running. Can you see anyone else emerging, I suppose, in the next coming days out of the list that's maybe available, or could there be somebody that's maybe, from nowhere and just appears? Could you see anything of that nature, or do you think one of these three is more likely to be the sort of eventual manager?
I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I don't think it's going to be Ashley Cole, if anyone's wondering about that. But yeah, it seems pretty likely to me that it's one of those three. As Conor said, they're speaking to somebody today, and we don't know if that's Jansen or if it's somebody else who completely hasn't been in the frame. But you look at those names that have been linked, and aside from these three, it has been Cuesta and Rosenior, who we obviously can now rule out. So I would be surprised, but I wouldn't completely rule it out. And if it does end up being somebody completely different to those three, then you have to say Norwich have done an excellent job of keeping them under wraps, because the amount of coverage that there's been around there, the amount that people want to know about the potential options for Norwich's next head coach, it probably makes sense that these candidates have emerged. So yeah, I think there's a reason why we've sort of narrowed it down to these three and why we're talking about these three so much. And for me, it feels likely that it will be one of those. And obviously, fans can get their predictions in. I'm not 100% sure who I think it's going to be yet, but right now it does feel like those three are the sort of central ones that everyone's talking about, that we're hearing about. And yeah, it would be really quite left field at this moment. And to be honest, a bit of genius if Norwich managed to now all of a sudden appoint somebody in the next couple of weeks, probably next week, who we just have not heard of yet. So yeah, I think probably it will be one of these three, but just to protect myself a little bit, I wouldn't completely rule it out of being somebody new.
Yeah, we'll dip into a few of the comments now. Dylan saying Pascal Jansen looks like the best choice, better CV. Gavin not hoping it's Will Still, which is interesting. There's been obviously a lot of talking about Gabriel Zara, which we will touch upon at the end of this show. Just away from the management situation. Twitchy Terry's the opposite. Will Still's Yellow Army. Peaky, he's going to take us up. Johannes Hoff Thorup. Twitchy Terry saying, Conor, can we confirm it's 100% not Neil Adams?
Yeah, I think he's busy in his technical director role, so he'll be involved, I'm sure, in the process. But it's they're definitely not going to scour all of Europe and end up with Neil Adams. I can definitely assure people.
Yeah, Freddie here on Facebook saying I'd wait until Russell Martin or Daniel Farke get sacked and take either of those. We only have to wait till Sunday. I mean, could you see that emerging if if Farke went and beat Russell Martin? Could that be a potential reunion, Sam? Is that the name that could, I suppose, throw up at the start of next week?
I think it's fairly unlikely, to be honest, and I think there's still a lot to play out in that situation. I would say definitely I wouldn't go back because sorry, I've forgotten whose comment it was, but they said whichever one of those two loses or gets fired, take one of them. And although I know Daniel Farke is obviously a huge modern legend of Norwich City, I think going back never really tends to work out especially well, apart from I suppose with Millwall and Neil Harris this season. So yeah, I'm not sure I'd be especially keen on that, although I have actually been writing a preview for that game, and the more I read about Russell Martin and the more I sort of look at his career, I am impressed, and because we've almost been so close to his journey and every Norwich fan has been keeping an eye on it, you sort of forget actually what a good job he's done. He's 38. He's managed 3 clubs, including 2 in the Championship, and he's currently waiting to be in the playoff final and could be a Premier League manager before long. So definitely somebody who's done very well with his career, but not an appointment I think is especially likely or even maybe an excellent idea. But it looked like Conor was going to come in with something when you originally said that.
I don't know if Conor wants to add anything.
I was. Sorry, I was desperately scrambling for the mute button. Yeah, all I was going to say is I think what you have to consider in terms of that debate is just how long Norwich City have been laying the ground for this appointment, and that's months rather than days and weeks. And the idea that, as they did a few years ago, that they would react and hire someone because they've lost their job, I just don't think is going to be the case here. Knowing Ben Knapper as we do, and the sort of profile that we're building up from him, he is very process driven. He's thorough. I don't think he's reactive. I don't think he's knee jerk, and I don't think. And this is probably why I would maybe say Liam Rosenior isn't a serious name for the frame, because up to a few weeks ago, he wasn't an option. He wasn't under consideration. That's the same with those two. And I think probably after Dean Smith, we've all learned that hiring a manager immediately after they've bounced out of a job is probably not the best idea. So yeah, that was going to be my contribution on that, really.
Yeah, there's a good question here on YouTube. Gentlemen, do you not think that too much delay or indecisiveness may result in us losing a gem like Thorup? There are a crazy amount of teams in the market for a new manager at the moment. A risk of vultures with the likes of Ipswich, Brighton, Man United, Hull, Sunderland, Chelsea, etc., all in for managers. I suppose, Conor, what do you make of that situation? There is a lot of teams, which has been pretty well documented, I suppose, in recent weeks, looking for managers. I mean, even in the Championship, I think, Plymouth maybe look like they might be getting Wayne Rooney, but you've still got Hull, you've still got Sunderland, and lots of other sort of teams in that bracket that be looking for new coaches. Is there any fear that those sort of clubs could come and swoop and potentially take Norwich's leading target?
Yeah, of course, and that's why you speak to 2 and 3, I think, and you make sure that you line them up correctly and you go through a process. And that's why this idea maybe that you just go out and just get the guy that you think is the number one target is just for the birds, really, I think. And it's important when you go through a process like this that you do speak to other candidates, because there might be points during the process where actually the guy that you thought was first choice for whatever reason might not be quite as attractive suddenly as option B after you've spoken to them, and there might be a bit more alignment with that. So I wouldn't suggest it's as routine as that. But yeah, I think it's the same as signing players, right? You try and keep the processes as on the low as you possibly can, because you don't want people to nick what you're trying to do. But by the same token, I think the timeline of this, Norwich are going to be so far down the track before potentially any of those situations have come up. I think with Thorup, you've got obviously the thing that he's got a team there that he is going to manage on Sunday, I think, come what may, irrespective of what Norwich decide. So I can't see anything progressing with him until after that point, and after that season is done, and that would be the same with any team. But from what I'm led to believe, I think conversations with him have been ongoing for a significant period of time. So you're asking again a manager maybe to throw in what is months of conversations, potentially even a visit to Colney if we're talking about Will Still, to then go and leapfrog to go for a different job elsewhere. Well, if they do that, then they're probably not the right person for the job anyway, I would suggest. So yeah, I think maybe, we're engaging in hypotheticals a little bit, but I'm not too concerned about that, to be honest. If it happens, great. Will Steele's been spoken about for Sunderland a lot. If he's Norwich City's top target, then Norwich have got him to Colney and done all of the groundwork on that. So yeah, that's all I would say. I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about that, to be honest. It's life. It would happen. I think maybe Burnley is the one that I would be concerned about in terms of Steele. I don't think he's in a position where he would be getting parachuted into Premier League clubs, but yeah, I think Burnley would be an interesting one if it popped up, and obviously they didn't go down the internal route for Craig Bellamy. But again, Norwich is so far down the track with this, you'd hope that they would be in a position pretty swiftly at the start of next week to at least line up and get all the ducks in the row for an appointment and an announcement later next week, which I expect to be the case.
Yeah, Dan Mayhew saying we can clearly see the profile of the candidates. Knapper has a clear plan of what type of coach he wants. I personally like this more scientific approach. There's a question here from Shaney NCFC on YouTube. The good news is we'll have a new head coach by the time pre-season starts in July. Will Norwich want to have their transfer incomings and outgoings by the time the pre-season begins? I mean, Sam, you actually wrote a piece about maybe bringing in players before a head coach, and Ben Knapper maybe having that control about what he wants to kind of look the squad to look like. It's maybe the coach has to be wedded to the players that he's brought in. Just want to maybe expand on that question there from Shaney NCFC.
Yeah, I don't think they see any need to wait for a head coach to come in before they start signing players, because the theory was they didn't know how long this process was going to take. And obviously, as Conor said, the idea now is that an appointment is likely sort of back end of next week. But at the start of this process, you go back a week or two, they were looking at it and thinking, can we wait 3 weeks before signing any players, if that's how long it takes to find the right person to be the head coach? And as you said, the sporting director is the thing that's tying this all together. And I think that is good news for Norwich fans, because the whole point of the sporting director head coach model when it first was introduced was that certain elements could come and go that maybe would have disrupted things previously. And I wrote in that piece that you mentioned, it doesn't make sense when almost every player that you sign these days is going to want a 2-year contract plus, to then be basing your signings on a job that on average I think only lasts about 18 months doesn't really make sense whatsoever. So the idea with the sporting director model is that the setup and the players are designed to work under different head coaches, and then the head coach is appointed to work with those sorts of players. So with Knapper overseeing it all, his vision for what a head coach can oversee is going to be the same vision as those players that fit into that model. So the idea is that the players fit the coach and vice versa, no matter what order they arrive at the club in. So yeah, I think in terms of signing players, they don't necessarily need to wait for the coach to come in there. And in terms of when they get those signings in, I think Shane's question was about whether they'll have most of their business done before the start of pre-season. And obviously that is the dream scenario for everyone. Every sporting director, every head coach, probably every player wants to know their future before the start of the pre-season, and they will get as much done, as they can, because it doesn't make sense not to do things early. But obviously there are a lot of unknowns. We don't know if Gabriel Sara and Jonathan Rowe, Josh Sargent, these sorts of players, we first of all don't know if they're going to leave. Then we don't know if they do, how much money specifically Norwich will have to spend as a result. So there are a lot of unknowns. I'm sure there was a base level that Knapper knew he was able to spend going into it, and he'll probably be able to spend that early on if they can strike deals for the players that they want. But we will need to see certain things unfold before Norwich know exactly what the situation is. And for that reason, I think it's going to be difficult to achieve the amount of churn that they need by the start of pre-season. So I don't think it's going to get to the point where it's going to be midway through July and Norwich are able to just put their feet up and say, that's the transfer business done. Because in a lot of ways, they're victim to the whims of other clubs, and when they decide to do their own business, and for that reason they'll need to react to replace players. They might get funds to sign players that they previously thought might have been out of their budget, and a lot of things can change. But obviously they will try and get as much as they can done early, and the good news is that the head coach search doesn't really impact that too much.
Yeah, Susan saying, what has Thorup done that makes him so attractive? Once this broadcast ends, if you go back to about sort of the first 10, 15 minutes or so, we speak a lot about maybe youth development and that kind of nature, maybe the stylistic element. Conor wants to jump in.
If you want a spoiler, I've got some quotes from him which are going to go up pretty shortly. So that's a little, I don't know if we can call it an exclusive, but that's for everyone watching. Pinkin.com very shortly after this video ends, and there will be some words from Johannes Thorup on links to Norwich City.
There we go. That's a cheeky plug. Jim Howson saying, what's the situation with Stuart Webber? Is he 100% gone now? I mean, Sam, just want to quickly expand on that one?
Yeah, completely gone. Ever since Ben Knapper arrived in the building, I think he was there for advice, but he wasn't actually making any decisions. And now his contract has actually expired. I think it expired back in March. So yeah, literally no official connection with the football club, obviously, apart from his past. I think actually he attempted his Everest climb. Was it this month or last month? But either way, it was unsuccessful. So yeah, you can go and read about that. But as far as Norwich City, that chapter is completely closed. The club have moved on. He's moved on. No connection there whatsoever now.
Yeah, good question here from Kevin. Also, another thing, will the Atanasios be playing a bigger part in the club next season, or just the same, occasionally visiting and leaving it to others? I suppose, Conor, what role maybe have those in the higher echelons of the club had involvement in this kind of process of bringing in a new manager? We've spoken a lot about Ben Knapper and what he wants, but obviously, there is these other people in play, the likes of Delia and Michael, the likes of the Atanasios. Do you think they're involved in this process of bringing in the new head coach?
Yeah, I think they will be, but again, I think largely that will be just on a consultation basis. Ben Knapper will be very much leading this process. He will be the one speaking to candidates, identifying the candidates, and going through that process. They will obviously then be consulted when there is a decision to be made in terms of who he thinks, and I'm sure if this is always how it used to work with Stuart Webber, so I'm sure it will be the same process. He will then make his case to the board and present who he thinks should be offered the job. That then gets voted on and formalised by the board of directors before an offer is made. So that's kind of how the process works. So I'm sure the Atanasio group and Delia and Michael will be involved at every stage. Likewise, as we've already spoken about work permits and different elements, there will be lots of different departments, I'm sure, inside Carrow Road working on a whole host of things, laying the groundwork for this, be it work permits, be it coaching qualifications, be it juggling all of the regulation and red tape that's required to ensure that when they get to that stage that they're ready for an appointment, they can absolutely get that process done as quick as possible. But yeah, make no mistake, this is Ben Knapper leading the process, and Ben Knapper, I would say alone, but I think probably with Neil Adams in support of him.
Yeah, we'll quickly just steer in a slightly different direction away from head coach. I've seen a few people mention it. Of course, there's been a few speculative rumours around Gabriel Zara's future in the last couple of days. I think there's been links to Roma this morning. Crystal Palace have emerged, as Kevin's asking here. I mean, Sam, no surprise really that these kind of links are coming out, I suppose, now, given his profile and what he'd done last season. It probably feels inevitable that, it's going to be tough for Norwich to keep hold of him this summer.
Yeah, I think we've known for a while that Crystal Palace were one of the clubs sort of sniffing around him. They obviously came to scout him during last season, and they're not the only ones. There have obviously been plenty of clubs very aware of what he's been doing, and if they have been to watch him at Carrow Road at some point this season, the chances are they saw some sort of unbelievable performance. So yeah, with them now linked, Roma, obviously there have been the previous links with West Ham and Torino and other clubs. I think even Atletico at one point were linked with Gabriel Zara. So it's clear the level of appreciation there is for him across the world, football-wise. And although I think he still needs to improve that consistency a little bit, anyone who's seen him in a Norwich shirt, especially last season, will know the talent that he possesses. So yeah, absolutely no surprise. Those bigger clubs are being linked with him, and to be honest, with another championship season in prospect and potentially one of transition for Norwich, it's going to be pretty hard to convince him to stay, even as much as he loves Norwich and his dogs love the Norfolk beaches. So yeah, I think it will be pretty difficult for Norwich to keep hold of him. The task for Ben Knapper, once those bids start coming in and once that interest gets a little bit more serious, is to try and get as much money out of that as he possibly can and try and boost his budget. And we expect that will probably be the case with a couple of other players as well. But yeah, anyone who's expecting to see Gabriel Zara in that new kit going into next season, I think is going to be left fairly disappointed, because, we all know the talent that he possesses, and it is probably fair to let him go now and admit that the time's come for him to move on from the Championship and from Norwich City in the state they are currently in. But yeah, this Crystal Palace one feels especially legit because we've been hearing them as a club that are fairly interested and have been keeping tabs for a while now. And I think it's the level of move that, to be honest, would suit him. So yeah, I probably haven't helped ease the nerves there a little bit, but I think everyone really knows that Norwich are right up against it if they want to keep Gabriel Sara this summer. However, with the finances that will probably provide, there are definitely positives, and you just hope that they can use the money in the right way, really.
Yeah, there's a good comment here from Kieran, which I think probably lends itself a little bit to the head coach dynamic, Conor. Hopefully we see the likes of Kamara and Hills given a chance next season. Of course, both of them have been called up to what was formerly the men's under-20s England squad. I think it's now called the Elite Development or something of that nature. What do you guys think? I mean, that probably feels quite kind of a sellable asset to a new head coach. They got these young prospects that, hopefully next season we're going to see more of. Do you think they're going to be given more opportunity maybe than they would have been under David Wagner?
Yeah, I think both, and this is just a feeling rather than anything I know, but definitely Kamara, but I think Hills probably as well. I think there'll be two that any head coach will be absolutely desperate to look at in pre-season and see what they can offer. I think the step for Hills is undeniably bigger than it is for Kamara, stepping up from League Two to the Championship. I mean, that's two whole levels. I think Hills, and I think it's probably widely accepted, really was performing towards the top end of League One comparatively in terms of data last year at Accrington. Kamara probably even above that. So, yeah, I think Abu Kamara definitely 100% an option, particularly given all of the stuff that you've just mentioned around Gabriel Sara. I'd throw John Rowe into that mix as well. I think the expectation at Norwich is that they are expecting links, they're expecting interest, they're expecting speculation in probably the golden trio, if we call them that: Sargent, Sara, and Rowe. I'd maybe even chuck Angus Gunn in there and make it a quartet, but I don't want to sell half the team. So I think he will. Brad Hills definitely, because of the reasons that we've mentioned, albeit I think he's played on the right side, and there are options at the moment that Norwich have in Shane Duffy and Grant Hanley who would be ahead of him. So that's up for him to hit the ground running in pre-season. That's up to him to really, showcase it. I went to watch him against Accrington, for Accrington in the back end of the season. And, I spoke to a few people in and around Accrington Stanley, and they were so impressed, not just with his performances, but his maturity. He'd even been given the armband on occasion by John Coleman when he was there, and John Doolan subsequently when he took over. And these are, people who are very experienced in the game. So that goes to show sort of the level of impact that he's had, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch on that group as well. The fact that they were willing to make a 20-year-old captain is absolutely staggering. So he should come in back into the building with a real, to really trying to stake a claim. And if he can't do that, then there are going to be plenty of suitors for him in League One, I think. And Abu Kamara, for me, has to be an absolute must in terms of what he produced last year, what this club for me is about and should be about. I think the next step for him is a season with Norwich City in the Championship. What does that look like? I don't know in terms of game time, but I think he's deserved that opportunity. He's given himself a platform to do that. And look, if he doesn't kick a ball and there isn't a minute that he gets, then everyone can reassess it in January. But from the noises that you hear, they're positive around Abu Kamara, and I'd expect him to be involved. But I think, Adebayor, I think we could chuck into this conversation as well. Jonathan Tompkinson as well, another one that I know that they like. It wouldn't surprise me if one of Hills, Adebayor or Tompkinson was involved, at least one, was involved in the first team group next year from the defensive perspective, particularly now, obviously, Danny Barter's gone and Ben Gibson's gone as well.
Yeah, a few other quick comments and questions. Kevin saying, is it 2 years left that Sarah's got? It is. It's till 2026, but the club have a year option as well on that, so you can kind of take that to 2027. So, yeah, almost 3 years there of contractual status left with Norwich City. Quick fire question to both of you. How much money would you take for Gabriel Sara? I don't want to sell him, but, theoretically, if you're Ben Knapper, what figure?
I think if somebody offered 30 million plus add-ons, you'd be pretty well tempted.
25 and add-ons.
Yeah, I think I've Conor.
Can I explain that a little bit? Just because I think that this is not a great market at the moment in terms of money. You've got club, particularly at Premier League. I know they're going to change the rules, but even there feels like a real wariness to spend big because of financial fair play and obviously clubs getting points deductions and all of that type of stuff. And I think Norwich do need to sell, and he is a sellable asset, and that would be a sufficient amount of money to get on with what they needed to get on with. So that is kind of why I see it. But equally, I think if I was in a dream scenario, I'd agree with Sam. If you were in a perfect market of maybe 2 years ago, you'd want Gabriel Sara to go with anything, anything that has a 3 in front of it. I think you, apart from point being the next being the next number or whatever you described that as. I'm not very good at maths. Then yeah, you would take.
There's a few other quick comments and questions around maybe other individuals. We'll tie them all together. Fiona asking about Adam Eder. I've got a question here about Jolis, which of course Dusseldorf getting a really good victory last night in terms of the playoff there for chance of promotion to the Bundesliga. And Shaney also asking for an update on Conor Bowe's contract situation, which of course was outlined in the release of the released and retained list that the club put out at the start of the week. I mean, Colin, do you want to quickly just tie maybe those 3 individuals together and maybe where the plates are at the moment on those?
Sorry, name the individuals again. I had my eye on my other screen.
Adam Eder.
Yeah.
You've got Christoph Jolis and you've got Conor Bowe.
Yeah, well, Conor Bowe is as is. That's in talks. I really think that could go either way. If I'm being honest with you, I think you could view it as a positive, the fact that he's still at the table, and you could view it as a negative at the fact that he's still on the table. But I think, given the noises that certainly you were hearing from his camp and from people close to him in and around January, the fact that he is at a stage where he is at least willing to listen to what Norwich City have to say to him is incredibly positive. So hopefully that is one that they can make the case for make the case for pathways and development that we've spoken about, and get him signed up, because in my view he's an excellent young talent and the type of talent really that Norwich City, similarly to Alex Matos, shouldn't be letting walk away from the club for nothing. Adam Eder, I think, is one that will go this summer. I think he probably feels that his race is run at Norwich City. I think if Celtic, what he's had at Celtic and the experience that he's had at Celtic, I think has been incredible for him on a personal level. So I think that he will go, and Jolis as well. I think he's so much interest and so much noise around him. Last summer he wanted to leave Norwich City for a fresh opportunity. I don't see much changing, particularly as a Championship club now, for him to be willing to come back and change it. Could be wrong, but that's my feeling on it. I think if you're Norwich, you're hoping that Dusseldorf don't activate that option that they've got, and that you can maybe hopefully get a little bit of an auction going for him that will drive the price up. That feels to me like the best case scenario, I think, on all of those 3.
There we go. We've been going for about an hour, so we're going to quickly round off. Guys, I'm going to give you both £1 out of my wallet, which is, I've had to stretch the budget a lot here to be able to do that.
Does it have any dust on it, that?
Yeah, they've both been at the bottom of my wallet, for a long time. Don't really get change, or you don't really use a lot of cash these days in the cashless system we live in. But I'm going to give you both £1, and if you've got this £1, who's your money on for the Norwich City job? And I suppose, is that the person that you want? There's 2 kind of separate elements there. Who's it going to be, and who do you want? Sam, go first.
I think it's going to be, if I had to guess now, Thorup. And actually, this conversation has made me think it will be a better appointment than I maybe thought going into it. I think going into it, I'm trying to be, I should be quicker, but going into it, I was maybe almost like 33% each on those 3. But the more we talk about it, the more Thorup feels like the best fit for Norwich. And if I had to predict now, I think it will be him, yeah.
Conor.
Yeah, I concur. If I had £1 at this moment in time, with the acceptance that it can change and it can alter, I think I'm leaning towards Thorup as the most likely. And I think he probably is the one that excites me most. But to be honest, out of the 3 that obviously are public knowledge and that we know about, Thorup, Still and Jansen, I think I'd be quite happy with any of those, to be completely honest. I think there's a case that all of them are pretty good appointments for Norwich City and where they are at right now. So yeah, that's my feeling on it, and it's going to be interesting to see how it concludes next week.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be joining you 2 guys and putting my £1 on Thorup as well. He feels to me kind of the one that excites me the most. I think we've kind of said, they all have their sort of pros, I suppose, and maybe the cons in terms of the risk element attached to all of them. But I think, given that Norwich want a new direction, and it should be hopefully an exciting project that we can all, as fans and us as the media, can attach to, and hopefully it will reap the rewards, I suppose, next season. Unless you 2 guys have got any other business or anything else you want to mention at the latter stages of this, then I think we'll sign off. no, I'm getting shaking heads. So I think that's probably it. Of course, lots to watch, I suppose, in the next week or so as to who could potentially be unveiled as Norwich City's new head coach. We'll have it across our channels, of course. We'll be doing various live videos. So of course, you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which the growth has been really great in recent weeks. So we thank you for your support on that one. You've got the Pink and Plus app, which of course you can take out a free trial to, which, I think the perfect time. Maybe if Norwich are going to have a new manager, there's going to be lots of new quotes and new lots, potentially additions in terms of the transfer market. So well worth signing up to that, $2.99 a month thereafter. So we think that's pretty good value and well worth checking out as well. With that, we're going to sign off on this Friday lunchtime. And of course, keep it locked, as I said, because I think it's going to be an exciting couple of weeks for Norwich City.